Hello all. Today we're going to explore the festive tale of little Jack Horner. We're going to look at the links between the little boy who pulled a plum out of a pie at Christmas time and a 16th century abbot who was hung, drawn and quartered at the orders of Henry VIII. And if you stay to the end, you'll find out how many plums there actually are in a Christmas pie. The rhyme goes as follows. Little Jack Horner sat in a corner, eating a Christmas pie. He put in his thumb and pulled out a plum, and said, "What a good boy am I." The story of little Jack Horner is a metaphor for selfishness, gluttony, and achieving success without effort or hard work. The implication being that Jack, far from being a good boy, is actually naughty. Jack is a name we often come across in nursery rhymes and is sometimes used to signify a thief or a knave, as in the Jack in a pack of cards. The earliest reference to little Jack Horner is in the tale of Jack Horner and the witty pranks he played from his youth to his ripe years, being pleasant for winter evenings, a tale of 6 sections found in a chapbook dating from 1764, although there is a reference to Jack Horner as early as the 14th century. In this telling, Jack was a 13-inch boy who lived near London, and was a pretty lad, who his father's heart he made full glad, his mother loved him well. As I've discussed in previous videos, chapbooks were cheaply made and roughly bound books, telling tales and stories with woodcut pictures. In this story, though, the section on eating the pie is found in the first verse, but is not particularly significant and doesn't happen until line 21. Peter and Ione Opie, the Diurns of the meaning of nursery rhymes and a favourite of this channel, are unconvinced on the merits of this being the origin of the rhyme we know today, on the grounds that the incident of the pie is totally unrelated to the rest of the tale. They believe the chapbook writers were hoping to cash in on Jack Horner and the eating of the pie after he'd made an appearance in a hugely successful satirical ballad by Henry Carey called Mamby Pamby, published in 1725. Carey's ballad made fun of many of the leading politicians of the time, and it ran as follows. Now he sings of Jacky Horner sitting in the chimney corner, eating of a Christmas pie, putting in his thumb, oh fie, putting in, oh fie, his thumb, pulling out, oh strange, a plum. This version is clearly almost exactly the same as the rhyme we know today. So what about the clickbait in the title of this video about someone being hung, drawn and quartered? Well, it might be that the story of little Jack Horner and the pie is nearly 200 years older than the namby-pamby story. This explanation describes real-world events, but unlike most examples of true meanings in nursery rhymes, telling tales of kings and queens, like in Jack and Jill, I'll put a link below, Jack Horner is a commoner. Even the Opies think there might be some truth in this tale. Little Jack Horner could be telling the tale of Thomas Horner. We don't know if he was particularly little. He was a steward to Richard Whiting, the last abbot of Glastonbury Abbey during the reign of Henry VIII in the mid-16th century. The name Jack perhaps replacing the name Thomas to denote him as a knave or scoundrel, as we'll soon discover. As a steward, little Thomas was a trusted servant of the abbot and charged with managing the estates of the monastery. Glastonbury was one of the most important and richest religious houses in England. By the time this story is taking place, Henry VIII had already started the dissolution of the monasteries, the land grab of the Catholic Church he conducted as part of the English Reformation. When Henry came to the throne in 1509, there were over 900 religious houses in England. By the 1530s, because of a combination of the desire to divorce Catherine of Aragon and a longing for more royal revenue, Henry had declared himself head of the Church of England and started breaking up the smaller monastic sites. Many in England agreed that a large number of the clergy were not living the most holy of lives, and there was a need for reform. The Reformation saw assets of these smaller houses summarily sold off and the buildings ransacked. Meanwhile, in Glastonbury, Abbot Whiting, as a member of the House of Lords, had been compelled to agree to these changes, although he was no doubt unsettled by how events were developing. Would his monastery be next? The king had promised that changes to the liturgy would be relatively minor under his rule, and large monastic sites such as Glastonbury would be unaffected. That was until the king decided that on reflection he would actually quite like the money in land and all the shiny silver and gold held in the larger monasteries. In an attempt to save Glastonbury Abbey itself from Henry's clutches, Whiting decided to, in effect, bribe the king. The abbey held vast estates. He would send the king the deeds to 12 manors. In what turned out to be a forlorn hope, Henry might overlook the abbey's riches. Entrusted with the task of taking the paperwork to the king, presumably at Christmas time, was our friend Thomas Horner. This was a clandestine operation, and where better to hide the deeds to the various manors than in a pie? Actually, the pie might be a metaphor for a chest, but it's more fun to imagine it being a pie, so let's go with that. And after all, it's been done before. Who can forget the 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie? Which I can do a video about if you like. We don't know what happened next. Maybe Thomas got peckish. Maybe he had light fingers, but according to this telling of the rhyme, when the pie got to the king, there were only 11 deeds, and somehow Thomas had become the proud owner of the plum asset, Mel's Manor in Somerset. Now, to be fair to Thomas, this telling of the story only emerged in the 19th century, and Horner's descendants, who still lived in Mel's Manor until the late 20th century, insist Thomas bought the house from the King's Commissioners in 1543. They got a receipt and everything. But let's run with the story, just for fun. Thomas's case is not helped by the fact Henry VIII decided to investigate Abbot Whiting for hiding the abbey's assets, and put him on trial in 1540. Horner was on the jury which tried his old boss. Whiting, then aged 78, was convicted of treason and sentenced to be hung, drawn and quartered, his head ending up on a spike outside his former abbey, which was all but destroyed, and today sits as a romantic ruin. Whiting was beatified by Pope Leo XIII in 1895. Whatever the truth behind the rhyme, it would seem the locals in Glastonbury went by the maxim of no smoke without fire when assessing the guilt or innocence of little Thomas Horner. A 2-line verse, known to be recited as early as 1680, condemned those who gained from the dissolution of the monasteries, and Horner gets a mention. Hopton, Horner, Smith and Thin, when abbots went out, they came in. I suspect this rhyme kept the memory of Thomas Horner alive, and so when Carey wrote his Little Jack Horner rhyme, it was requisitioned by the people of Somerset and the story attached. I sort of think, if it was originally about Thomas, surely it would have been Little Tom Horner, which scans just as well as Jack. And finally, what about the plum in the Christmas pudding? In many ways, to modern ears, this is the strangest part of the whole rhyme. The image in all the Mother Goose books is of a little boy with a pie and Jack smiling with pride, as on the end of the thumb is a big purple plum. The thing is, a Christmas pudding, or even a plum pudding, doesn't contain any plums. So what's that all about? Well, plum pudding is likely to have evolved from a dish called plum pottage, which included preserved meats, breadcrumbs, sandalwood, and in some cases plums. But over time, the plum was replaced by dried fruits like prunes and raisins. In the Victorian period, basically any dried fruit was called a plum. So why the talk about plums at all, rather than property deeds being pulled out of the pie? There's quite a few tenuous suggestions here. Let's see what you think. Mel's Manor had rich reserves of lead. The Latin word for lead, and the reason its chemical symbol is Pb, is plumbum. But when little Jack put his thumb in the pie, he pulled out the plum prize of the lead mines. Not convinced? Well, how about that plum was a slang word for £1,000? And how much did Thomas Horner pay for the manor? £1,831. Personally, I'm not convinced by that one. I suppose fundamentally, plum rhymes with thumb, and raisin doesn't, and nor does title deeds. And the plum is a metaphor for the prize Horner acquired through an underhand deed. So, that's the story of Little Jack Horner. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing for more. Bye for now.